Making investment decisions and personal finance choices is one thing when you're an individual, but what happens when you join up your finances with a partner for the long term? You're listening to the Investing Mastermind Podcast. I'm Michelle Markey.
And I'm Sina Lundhold.
So, in today's podcast episode, we'll talk a little bit about a subject that can be a little bit difficult to think about. Like, it's not a very simple subject to just say, one thing or another because there's no one size fits all for every couple, but it's been discussed somewhat throughout some magazines and newspaper articles about when couples need to jointly handle their finances, what happens and what's best practice or what are some common pitfalls because many times the source of a lot of problems in relationships are finances. And what it ultimately boils down to are what are your values in terms of sharing those with your partner. And some of the train of thought we have here is while we often focus on investing directly, like making our own personal decisions when it comes to investing, what might be some of the things we should consider when we have a partner or also a family, and how do we manage our finances and investment decisions, keeping these key stakeholders in mind? So, what do you think, Sina? This is a broad subject, but we're just going to talk a little bit about it and see where it goes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so important, right? Because, all families are, of course, different, but it is such an important topic, right? And it's something that just a few years ago that I didn't necessarily pay much attention to. We used to actually just hire a financial advisor and then have them kind of help with our investing, which, turned out not to be such an amazing idea after I found Warren Buffett. I found out that, okay, the return we were getting from just letting someone else deal with our money was not at all even up to par with the market average. So it is so important. And I can only speak for us here, but I am the one that's making, investment decisions and when it comes to the stock market. But for example, in regards to house, it is of course something that we talk about. How do we want to structure our mortgage? What is our risk profile when it comes to, taking risks with our house and with our mortgage? So, and luckily we're very similar on our thoughts. We haven't had any big arguments around that, but it's definitely one of those things that's super difficult, at least from what I can see, is that, when there's two parties that actually have to agree on how much money should be invested and how should you purchase a house. So we can definitely discuss some of those topics in today's episode.
Let's say we start out with, say, making financial decisions, like basic ones. When it comes to, let's say you move in together with someone and you're thinking about how do we want to split the grocery bill and the utilities and rent, or if you bought a house, the mortgage. So all these kinds of questions, it really boils down to what your individual values are and what the values are of your partner. Because if you're not on the same page, that could lead to a lot of arguments, a lot of strife over what you think are little things, but then they turn into things that could be a big deal. And we should not take that for granted. Like, let's say someone in the relationship likes doing a lot of a certain thing, like shopping. Shopping might not be a value that both partners share equally. Like, someone might like to buy a lot of kind of superfluous things that they think makes them happy. And the other partner's like, oh, I don't need to buy so many things. I'm perfectly happy not shopping. So how do you reconcile between someone who likes to shop a lot and someone who is just getting the bare necessities? Those are coming down to the values, and we have to talk through those. It's not to say that couples couldn't get along, but there has to be a mutual understanding because let's say you join up your credit cards and then on the credit card, you as one of the persons in the relationship are not really spending all that much because you're not much of a shopper. And then the other person is constantly buying new things like new gadgets or new shoes. And you're like, but why? Like, do we need all these gadgets and stuff? Like, what is the purpose of this? So, talking about these things early in a relationship before maybe you sign up to have joint credit cards or a joint bank account to pay for whatever bills, it would be helpful to talk through these things and make sure we're on the same page before we go down too far along.
100%. It is so important because I actually think that's where a lot of people are not necessarily sharing a lot of values. The way we have structured it here is, and we've done that since we met and since the first time we moved in together, and we still agree on that approach, is that, we have a lot of shared accounts and shared things. So throughout our lives, sometimes one person have been earning more than the other and has taken more of the financial load. So for example, paying more of the mortgage, a percentage more of the mortgage, and the other person paying less. There's been different times where I've had to pull more and then my husband had to pull more of the financial load. So it's actually been equal. The way we structured it is that we have these shared accounts where, we have all the utilities, groceries, we have shared savings, and then the rest of the money that we earn, we dispose of ourselves. So if he's a big shopper, I don't get in his business about what he wants to buy. If he wants to buy a new motorcycle, he can go ahead and do that without me having any opinion on that, as long as we still can meet the financial obligation that we have to our savings and our expenses and things like that. And that also means that, for example, for me, that I'm investing a lot of the money that I save, but I also do help him with investments since it's me that knows a lot about that. So also growing his money, growing the kids' money. Our kids have a lot of money because of their savings have been invested. So yeah, they're going to be well off when they turn 18 or 21 and get access to that money. But that's the way we've decided to do it here in order to actually not have those fights about, okay, you spend money on that and I don't agree on that. So here it's like, and I also think, none of us think that the other one is spending money on ridiculous things, because if we had the system and the other one was looking over and seeing, okay, there's a lot of poor choices here, that wouldn't have been good. But it really works for us to do it like that, to kind of have separate accounts and then some shared, instead of, pooling everything into one big pile.
And that's a great way to get financially naked with your partner, is to talk through all of those arrangements like you just described. So it's good to know ahead of time, like, what do you think you would do? Maybe you don't know if someone is about to run out and buy a motorcycle. You have no idea, but you could learn about each other and ask, is this the kind of thing you would do? Or do we want to set some guardrails? Like some articles I've read suggest if you have certain spending limits, like some have talked about how if someone's going to make a purchase over $1,000, it's not that they can't do it, but maybe you should talk about it first with your partner and say, hey, listen, I've been having my eye on this motorcycle. I think it's a great deal. I'm going to promise to be safe and not drive or bike recklessly. That might be things that the partner wants to talk through before you go ahead and make a big purchase such as that, just as a random hypothetical example, because the partner could have all kinds of concerns in addition to the financial concern. It could be safety concern, like that is maybe not the safest vehicle to get around with. There could be other feelings that people have, or, you never know where people are coming from sometimes, or they have personal experiences that inform their opinions on certain things. So it can help to talk through these things, like, should there be any spending limits, or should you run it by your partner if it's going to be a certain amount that they're going to spend? So different things, like some person might think, oh, I'm going to buy my partner a car for their birthday. And the one person could be thinking, oh, I'm such a good partner. Look at me getting my special person this car. And then the other person's like, I don't need a new car. Why did you spend $30,000 on a new car? And, that just shows a bit of a gap in values of what do we think the other person would value? Do they want you to be doing kind of such things of going out and getting this huge purchase that they did it, they had good intentions about it, but they didn't know what maybe your preferences might have been. So there might be some of those discussions to be had. And I think they can go a long way. Like I mentioned, if we're willing to get financially naked with our partners and significant others and go through some of these scenarios and what ifs and come to an understanding of what's comfortable for the other person.
One thing my husband and I actually have been doing is to many times throughout our, life together, we've asked each other some questions. So it's definitely something I recommend. And, it's questions about, so how did your parents, what happened when you were a child? How were your parents talking about money? Did you learn about budgeting? Because, to be completely honest, I didn't have great money habits when I lived on my own as a young woman. I had very poor money habits. So for me to actually, getting some better money habits, I read books and I educated myself. And one of the things was actually asking myself these questions about what did I actually learn when I was a kid, but also asking your partner those questions about what was the conversation about money in your house when you were a kid. And, do you have any habits, like did your parents save or did they spend their money? Understanding the parents and the route you've been on actually is super helpful. And also listening to what is it your partner is saying. Is there something that you could benefit from actually adapting some of the things that they're doing, and be open and listening to that? What we've done is oftentimes when we've been in the car on a big road trip, had hours in the car, I've been, sitting with the questions. And of course you need to focus on the traffic and everything, but having that conversation in the car is actually a great thing. Or once you get to your destination, you could do the questions and things like that. So I highly recommend asking some and being curious of that. Don't be just judgmental, just be curious and open, and maybe also talk about, okay, so my parents did it this way, your parents did it that way. What is our way actually going to be in the future?
And sometimes finances aren't always equal between partners. And there are different stages where, like you mentioned, Sina, someone might be taking on more of the financial burden with the mortgage and paying for things in general. That could be a possibility if someone is maybe the breadwinner for a while, or maybe it switches. And so even when things might not be the most financially equal, like it's not likely that everybody will be totally equal, that both partners make exactly the same salary and have exactly the same amount of savings and investments. So since things are not going to be the same, how do we talk about those things so that both sides have an understanding and can accept the way things are? Like how can it be made equitable even if it's not equal? And I really love the idea of what you mentioned of talking through these questions in a road trip. And then what you can do to help both of each other be on the same page going into the future is then write it down. Like I believe in writing things down. So you could take a notebook and say, okay, on this day, this was our philosophy about finances. Like you mark it in a diary or a journal, and you kind of think of it as sort of a little financial plan. Like people talk about what's your financial plan, and you think of it like this important binder that some financial planner person gives you, and they tell you, fill this in. And, it can be a little daunting at first, but if you take it also in a casual way, one could maybe note down some of our thoughts because they could also change. Like we might have certain opinions and ways that we're doing things today, but in some months or years down the line, it could change. And then maybe it's no longer what someone thinks is the best way to be. Like someone could be like, yeah, let's really invest a lot in US Treasury bonds. But then maybe in a few years, the Treasury bond yields are down, and then that's no longer as good of an investment decision. So you might have to go back to some of the decisions you once made and say, how should we reallocate our money? And if children come into the picture, like you mentioned, Sina, how do we make financial decisions so that our children can be on a great financial footing in the future? Like people talk about saving up for their college fund, the university fees, if that's something that you envision your children to pursue. I mean, college is not always for everybody. So, what if your children don't want to go to college and they want to instead do trade school, which is totally acceptable? There's a lot of actually sort of a trend of Gen Z doing more blue collar work. And sometimes you don't need to go to college to be happy, as some of the potential takeaways. So, there's so many kinds of questions we can think about, like, how does our partner feel about our children going to college or not? How would that make them feel? Like, there's so many questions to also consider there.
I can imagine in the States where there's, where you have to pay for more things, it's definitely some of the things that needs consideration for college funding, etc. But also, to just ensure that as your child grows older, that their FICO score, which is connected to the credit card, is that they get a head start on that. So there are small tips and tricks on what to do there, and ensuring, in a previous episode, I believe we talked about the Roth IRA and how, your children could also benefit from getting one early on. So there's a lot of, financial tips and tricks out there, and it's so difficult sometimes to learn about these things because, you can search online and there's so much information. So sometimes it's a good idea to actually hire help. We've done that too, in actually getting some education or hire some advisor that could give us a few tips and tricks so on, how to approach things and help us. And it's a good investment. I know, you would have to give money and actually buy some help, but sometimes that is actually a good idea to get there faster and actually get on the same page on things. So yeah.
For sure. I mean, there are so many ways that you can help prepare for your future. And another thing that a lot of couples might not think about early enough is their will and their estate plan. Even though we think we're young and we have a lot of time, but there's some times when wills are not updated or they don't have one. Like, I think Elvis Presley might not have had one, and that's still causing some problems in his family down the line with what property and which assets go to which family members. It's still a bit of a problem. So there are so many questions with trying to plan for when you might leave assets to future family members. And it's really important to update your investment account beneficiaries with who you want your money to go to should the worst case scenario happen. And a lot of people forget to do that. So if you take away nothing else from this podcast, but to do one very important thing, I highly encourage people, if you have a 401k, you have an IRA, whether it's traditional IRA or Roth IRA or any other investment account or your bank accounts, make sure you have your intended beneficiaries listed. And if things in relationships change, like sometimes there's the worst case scenario and you need to update certain beneficiaries, make sure you periodically check those at least once a year and check who your beneficiaries are that are listed on your account, so you make sure that should the worst case scenario happen, that your money goes to the people you want it to go to. There are some people that don't always want, say, in certain weird scenarios, you don't always want your money to go to certain obvious people in your relationships, and there could be other people that you want your money to go to. So that's just something to keep in mind as a subject to talk about with your partner. Like, especially if you're married, then there's different laws with how property is shared and who the money would go to should the worst case scenario happens. Definitely it can be a heavy subject to talk about, but the earlier we start talking about it with our significant others, the better that we will be in the long term and hopefully have good financial outcomes.
Yeah, so I can hear there's actually a lot of topics we could unpack here, maybe in future episodes. So if the listeners out there, if you're thinking we would love to hear more about personal finance, about finances for couples, etc., it would be great if you could let us know. We're always curious to know what you guys want to hear about. So do let us know. But we're coming to an end of the episode today, and I don't know if you have any final remarks, Michelle.
Yeah, this was great. I mean, there's so much to talk about here that I hope our listeners value this too. So we hope that everybody will be benefited by these ideas, and we'll talk more about investing and personal finance in the future.
Absolutely. And next time we'll be doing that will be on Tuesday in the next episode. So see you back here on the same channel on Tuesday.
Till next time.
If you enjoyed the show and found the content informational, we would be super grateful if you would leave us a review and follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you automatically get new episodes in your feed. We publish a new show every Tuesday.
The contents of the Investing Mastermind podcast are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. None of this is investing advice, and if you need help in your personal situation, please consult with a professional.